Let's get down to business. I'm really excited about our guest tonight. Lord Dominic Johnson is a British financier, fund manager, and politician, and now serves as co-chairman of the Conservative Party. Prior to the last election in the last Parliament, he was the Minister of State for Regulatory Reform under Rishi Sunak, after having been appointed by Liz Truss as Minister of State for Investment. He's a former deputy chairman of the Conservative Party and has been a councillor in the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea. He's now got one of the key tip-top jobs in bringing about the Conservative Party's renewal. So this should be a fascinating hour. Dominic, thanks so much for joining us. How the very devil are you, sir?
I mean, it's amazing to be here, and thank you, Mark, and thank you for all of you. I can't see any of you. You are hidden, shrouded in anonymity, which is probably a good thing. They've got their thumbs up because they're pleased to be hidden, and I just have so appreciated what you've done. This movement, the PopCon movement, that we're going to talk about the principles around the movement if we're going to win, but also what you've done as a person. You have been one of the earliest and most successful advocates for the principle of freedom, and all the work you've done, the IEA and the other think tanks, and the work you did with Liz, I think was extremely important. And I'd like to heap praise upon you. So if there's an emoji for the praise heaping button, I'm not sure what it is, but press it now, because truly it's people like you that drive us, and the correction to high quality free market principles and philosophies absolutely come from people like you. So thank you for everything that you've done. And I'm very proud and pleased to be here this evening.
Bless you, Dominic. Well, it's all going to be downhill from here then, isn't it, after your very, very kind words about it?
Well, I hope so.
um, so look, let's begin just by talking about what's your audit of the health and the state of the party at the moment? Obviously, we got a total shellacking in July, not really unsurprising, but we lose 2/3 of our seats. We got our lowest vote share since democracy began. It's obviously going to be a huge process to rebuild. We elect Kemi as leader in November. She's starting to put some of the building blocks in place. We've seen the Labour government have, I think, a more torrid time in their early months in government than many expected. But if you were to believe the opinion polls, our vote is about the same as it was at the general election. The Labour vote is down a lot. The Reform vote is up a lot. That's quite a challenge. I suppose that's about the spot price. What's your audit of where the party stands at the moment?
Well, I mean, it's the core question. I mean, you and I and many of the people listening on this call have spent many years in politics, and there's a cycle around politics, and there's no question that the day after the election last year we're at the bottom of the cycle, and it takes time to come out of that. I think very importantly, Kemi's core focus, in my view, is to re-establish trust with the British people. And to do that, the Conservative Party itself has to be seen to be a party that is trustworthy, has integrity, and can deliver. And so my job actually, I think, in opposition becomes more important, and the job of my colleague Nigel Huddleston, because the only thing that people can look at in terms of what is a reference point is how is the Conservative Party machine performing, how is it behaving, how are the people who run it behaving, and so on. So it's a really, really important task in order to effectively reinvent the Conservative Party machine. And we've got some questions this evening, no doubt, on the Conservative Party itself and the structure. But my job, what I describe it rather glibly as the three M's: members, money, and the machinery of the party. And building a new and renewed membership, a movement, actually, I call it, not necessarily to the traditional concept of a member paying £39 a year, which is very important, but actually Margaret Thatcher and so on won by having whole armies of fellow travellers around her, whether it was teachers, parents, people who use public transport, just citizens who wanted to get ahead. And so concepts such as PopCon are very relevant for that. And that's going to be an enormous focus. And I want us to make sure we put a lot of resourcing into that and make it exciting. I mean, politics should be fun. And I don't know whether everyone enjoyed the last few months or years of the Conservative administration, but it was pretty furrow brow. And coming out of that's been pretty furrow brow. And we've got to have a great time as a party that loves each other, cares for each other, is an enormous family, and has the common goal of making this country great again and winning elections. The second part, money. I've spent 15 years probably raising money for the Conservative Party on and off, and it's an enormously important job to resource us because the world has changed. And the third part, which is the machinery of the party, is fed by our resourcing. So we can't be naive about that. And just to give me a few moments to introduce, because I think this is quite an interesting concept, But basically, the world has changed enormously in the last 18 months. I would say maybe even in the last 12 months since the beginning of last year. And we've moved firmly from an age of literacy into an age of oracy. So, how we communicate and how we ingest information, different parts of our brain are basically being employed from the period before where you read something. Even if you may have read it online, you digest it, you disseminate it, and then you sort of regurgitate the other side, what your views and positions are, to now information is conveyed visually, orally, and orally. And so I have to really try to move the machine of the Conservative Party, literally the machinery, be it technology or people operating that machinery, from the age of literacy into the age of oracy. So that's a big project. It requires total mindset change. It requires new technology, new training, new ambitions, new goals and outcomes. And so, if you combine that together with enough resourcing and a strong movement, you're actually going to have, in my view, in 6 to 8 months, and I don't want to be specific about it, but it takes time. So once you go through the summer, I think you're going to start to see some really strong ramifications around that and the message delivery becoming far more effective and penetrative. And that builds a positive momentum. And if I come back in 6 months, you can hold me to account on that. But I'm pretty positive we're heading in the right direction, even if now it still feels like we're at the bottom of the cycle.
Okay, well, there's a very direct question by Angus Allen, which is one of the most upvoted. His question is very short and sharp. How skint is the Conservative Party within your three M's? How are we doing the money? I hear completely conflicting reports. So on the one hand, no money's coming in. On the other hand, then the Electoral Commission returns look pretty positive. I think there was one quarter where we raised more money than the other parties combined. What's the basic financial audit of the party now? Or is it over your longer term cycle sort of too early to tell? We're still prospecting rather than banking checks.
No, we need to raise money now, and it's essential actually. If you take a 3 or 4 year time frame, money spent now is far more effective than money spent on the day. In fact, I'm always surprised as a key fundraiser to the party how much money we raise on election day. People call up and say we want to give you £100. We want you to win the election, and obviously I bank it because you're sort of expecting that to happen. But I mean, I wish people understood that money invested now in technology and campaign managers is what counts. And what I'm amazed at is the conflicting storyline, because the facts are the facts. It's all public. Everything's transparent, as it should be. So you can just read in the papers how much we raised in the last quarter of last year. Kemi came in on the 2nd of November, so that was pretty far into the last quarter. I mean, we've written off October because there was no leader. So in sort of a month and a half, we managed to effectively, and I know this isn't completely specific, but broadly speaking, raise more than I think all the mainstream political parties in the United Kingdom combined. And that does include, I know, some support from concepts such as short money. That's amazing. And that came in on the back of people who wanted to support Kemi Badenoch herself as the leader, who saw the renewal programme as one that they wanted to get behind and realised it was their opportunity to sort of step up to the plate. As a sort of fundraiser, I'm always reluctant to say we're doing very well because I don't want to put anyone off listening to this call because we just need enormous quantities of resources. But we are actually doing pretty well. I'm really pleased with where we are in terms of what our targets are and what we're trying to achieve at this stage. But we've got to do a lot more. I'm always amazed at how little British political parties raise, full stop. And I think I went over to the Republican chairman, meeting with the Republican chairman a few months ago in DC, and he said he had 1.4 billion last year, and I felt a bit embarrassed when I didn't tell him. Actually, I didn't want to tell him what most political parties raise in one year outside of an electoral cycle. But we want to raise a lot of money because it's a good thing to have a lot of people supporting the party financially, and we need those resources. It's important because we want to get our machinery right, and we want to have the support needed in order to help us build our movement and make sure we get our message out. I can't underestimate the importance of that. So, the more the merrier, but I'm really pleased with where we are. And actually, it's a very important positive indicator of the leadership in the real sense, because, money talks, if I can say it in a way that is, decent and with integrity.
Dominic, John May says money follows machinery and message. How do you communicate to those who lost faith with the party that they should fund an election win? What is the sort of message? I mean, obviously you want to bring in the big checks from those who can afford them, but even to those who might throw in 10, 20, 50 pounds, perhaps £100
Yes.
into a bucket. What's the message as to, why we should fund the Conservative Party here and now? What's the pitch?
I mean, my pitch is simple. The Conservative Party, the centre-right party of the United Kingdom, is probably the most important political element in the history of this country, certainly over the last 300 or 400 years. And we have to repair it and make it strong and make it electable again. And that doesn't happen either for free or by magic. And I say this to lots of my contemporaries and friends who, frankly, have got either bored of politics or felt that they were disillusioned with the Conservative Party. I say to them, the death of the Conservative Party is not in your interests, and it won't change unless you get involved. So this is a mass participation exercise, which in itself is a good. And we know we're right. We know that our views in terms of how the individual has our own freedom versus the state, particularly when we see what Labour are doing to us over the last sort of 8, 9 months or whatever, we know we're right. And this is important. We take our philosophies, we turn them into positions, and then at the very end of that, we have our policy platform that we can go to the country with. But the reason why we're all here listening on this call, and I'm here giving my time to engage with everyone, is because we believe passionately in the principles around conservatism, and we know that they're good for this country. And that's what I tell people: come and get involved. It's wonderful. And at the bottom as well, come and get involved now, when there's such an obvious need. Get involved in policy, help us raise money, help us build the movement, bring us your ideas, bring us your new way of doing things. I mean, if I could just go off on a tiny tangent, because I want to follow your questions, but you might be interested in this in the sense that life has changed. Okay, so not only has politics and the way we communicate totally changed from literacy to oracy, but in terms of my children, I've got teenage children. If I compare it to my life, I was born, I went to school, I left school, I got a job, I bought a car, I got married, I had children. I'll retire eventually, and I'll die. Okay, my daughter who's 16, she's been born. Okay, fair enough. So we've got that in common. She won't finish education in the same way that I did. She'll have many different educational cycles. She won't have a car in the way that I did. She won't have one job all her life, which I've basically done, almost with the same company. She'll marry later. She'll have children later. She might not retire. And there's a possibility that a child of 16 today won't die. So everything we have designed in terms of our Victorian political system, I had as a minister a red briefcase in which papers were put. That was like last year. All our processes for the linear life of a human, in terms of how you have tax, how you interact with society, and so on, it's really come to a conclusion. And we have to design powerful new policies for people who want to realize the best version of themselves. So we need a total reinvention. But all of that still sits very comfortably on our principles of freedom and community and family and security, which are buzzwords that are pretty well worn through, but we know what they mean. And if you rebase to that and you're innovative and bold, then we're the only group of people who can actually have a real answer to these massive solutions for our children.
Very interesting. Do you think at all that the Conservative Party brand is a bit behind the curve there? Yeah, sure, we've been around for several hundred years, but uh, are we seen by the electorate as a bit out of date, old-fashioned, crusty, not new, not fresh, and particularly competing somewhere proximate to our electoral and philosophical turf is the Reform Party, something new, something different, rallies, fireworks, Birmingham Arena hired out, huge numbers of TikTok followers, and God knows what else. We've got quite a bit of catching up to do, haven't we?
So, I mean, we've been around since 1847, and I went down to the Bodleian archives, and I'm not sure how publicly available they are, but I think if you want to go, you can find a way to go and see the archives. And what I was reminded of was the length of the sort of history of the party. We've seen these periods where we have reinvented ourselves in order to appeal to a mass audience. And we did that with the Primrose League under Disraeli. We did that in the 20s. We did that in the 40s, 50s under Lord Walton. We did it under Margaret Thatcher. And we need to do it again. We did it to some extent under David Cameron, but we particularly need to do it again to turn the party, which each time became party of the institutionalized party, into a party that's truly of the whole people in the United Kingdom, people who want to go somewhere rather than the protected interest. I think the biggest mistake people make is when they hear the word conservative, they hear the word conservation. Mm-hmm. And that's not what we are, in my view. We're a party that is constantly thinking of ways to disrupt the existing order to give people better lives. And we have to pursue that aggressively because I think, to be honest, and I'm careful how I don't want to be quoted as the chairman of the party out of context, but it's clear that the brand of the Conservative Party, I think, has become one where people are confused in terms of what it actually means because our record in government over particularly the last 5 years was firstly very disjointed in terms of, we had a number of different leaders, and so it's hard to pin on us a sense of sort of specific direction. And I think in many instances we didn't represent the sorts of conservative values that I wanted to, even though I was in the government. And I'm sensitive how I say that, but I think we would agree that's the case. It's not just a project of going back to basics, in inverted commas, and restating some sort of reheated Thatcherism. It's a case of using our basic principles and philosophies and building on top of that a really powerful, futuristic vision to enable people to live their lives in relevance over the next 30 years.
Very interesting. Well, let's share with you, Dominic, and the audience. We've got 100 or so people on the call already on this. Some of the findings that we found from Conservative members who we survey every 2 or 3 weeks on a range of different sort of topics. But in advance of this event, we decided to ask them about the machinery of the Conservative Party. And just a few riders here, right? Firstly, so we had 571 people answered the survey, of whom nearly 4 in 5 are paid up members of the Conservative Party. The other fifth are Conservative supporters, but not necessarily party members, maybe lapsed, maybe considering joining. We undertook the survey between the 7th and the 14th of April. And look, I don't claim that this is an opinion poll. It's a survey, really. We haven't balanced this for region or for gender or for age or the rest of it. These are people who are just offering their opinions to us. But I thought these opinions were interesting. As I say, there's a whole swathe of questions, but I've selected 5 to share with you and ask your thoughts. First up, we asked folk about the internal workings of the Conservative Party and how much of a priority should that be. And the question put in family fortune style was, how much do you agree with this? Reforming the internal workings of the Conservative Party should be one of Kami Badenoch's priorities. Strongly agree, 56%, agree, 31%. Tiny numbers disagreed, 3% disagreed, 1% strongly disagreed. So from the cohort of party members, it seems that sort of changing the way the Conservative Party operates, I know it's never comes up on the doorstep, right? I mean, nobody has ever said to me, I was thinking about voting Conservative, but I'm not particularly keen about how you convene your national convention meetings. Clearly, that never, ever comes up on the doorstep. But it seems to me it's a key element of getting the party match fit. Our own internal processes about how we organise ourselves are vital, such that we are having greater impact in every corner of the country. So that was on, that shows that there's a great desire, I think, for radically changing the workings of the Conservative Party machine and constitution. And then we asked how it's going. And if we can move to the next slide. Look, 42% don't know. 47% say they think it's going poorly, of whom 30% say quite poorly, 17% very poorly, 1% say very well, 10% quite well. Now, look, I know Conservative Party members are hard taskmasters, right? We want everything done to perfection yesterday, and long that may continue. But does that give you pause to think that, so more needs to be done more quickly to overhaul how the Conservative Party internally operates?
So, firstly, thanks very much for doing this. It's really wonderful. We cannot have too much of a feedback loop. It's as simple as that. We have to navigate our way forward from here. And so having input from 571 good folk who are willing to spend their time clicking on their poll options is just brilliant. And I love this because this gives me and Nigel and the leadership team constant sort of fuel to keep us going when it comes to making the necessary reforms. I think it's brilliant. So thank you for that straight up. The second one is, I think the one I'd like to actually think is this slide, which is how is internal reform going? And my focus has been on the machine of CCHQ with Rachel McLean and some other key actors. And I think that first I have to be very honest with you. This is a big sort of turnaround story. And I'm very much of the view that the people in the CCHQ are actually very, very high quality. The people are excellent. I've come across constantly incredibly focused, very hardworking individuals. But the machine has, in my view, lacked specific leadership for quite a long time in terms of what its purpose is, particularly in relation to how the party, the members, interact with it. And we saw that very clearly and boldly in the election last year when it came to selecting candidates and so on, the frustrations that frankly we all felt. So when sort of asked, where are we in terms of the reform process? The answer is we've now got to the stage where we'll start to see the benefits of the reform process, literally now. It's taken 6 months. I mean, I was effectively appointed in November, but there was a handover period. You come to the end of the year, and we really sort of started fresh on Jan 1. So we're looking at 3.5 months really of work. So considering that, I think we've moved pretty fast. And there have been some significant reorganizations within CCHQ, which will now start to yield benefits. And some of them are practical, some of them are sort of technical, and some of them are philosophical. And I just want to cover 3 that I think are most relevant to this audience. The first is candidates. Now, I think the candidate selection process is at the very cornerstone of a successful political party, because you need great people in order to win elections, and then you need great people in government in order to stay in government and change the lives of Britons for the better. And so who we select, both in terms of their technical skill sets, in terms of their ability to come into Parliament and become a senior cabinet minister, but also in terms of their philosophy, in terms of are they, true conservatives. I think a lot of people felt frustrated that we didn't sort of have that true bench when we wanted it, certainly towards the end of the last administration. So candidates is going to be a really important series of changes. And I think Kemi wrote a very good note on this in Con Home a couple of days ago, I think with Julian Elker, who's an excellent chairman of the convention, by the way. A new head of candidates has been appointed. We're going to put a lot of resourcing in to make sure there's a proper team to support them. And we're going to ensure that we cast the net as wide as possible for the right type of candidates. And in terms of sort of how people have their say in terms of selection, I think that has to be very, very tightly bound together. And I always felt when people, the great question you have to ask is, why should I be a member of the Conservative Party? And the concomitant pushback piece was, if I can't select a candidate, we'll have a say in policy. And I agree. And so we have to reverse engineer that. I want people to say, I want to be a member of the Conservative Party so that I can have a say in policy and I can have a say in who my candidate is going to be. At the same time, you've got to have a central machine that picks the right people and has a screening process and so on. I think we all understand that. So a revolution in candidates, very welcome and very, very necessary. And then the second part is on policy. I want as well as a member to have input, because I think that's how you get good policy. And in terms of technology now, we can have a conversation with all 150,000 odd members. In fact, we can talk to 35 million voters one-on-one using good technology and crowdsource ideas and get people behind them. Get people behind the consensus for change is really the only way we're going to be successful in any event. So we have these policy streams. Alex Burkhardt is leading that. Again, I think that Kemi's written on this. There have been some good announcements about how this will function and how the party membership and the movement will be able to feed in. And that's absolutely central to that. And then I think the last part, as I said, the sort of 3 parts is really how the membership functions. I'm not an expert on the Constitution. You're right, it's never come up when I've knocked on a door. But it's something that actually, when I'm canvassing, comes up a lot. So, you go out, I was out yesterday in Wiltshire. And so whilst the door, the householder doesn't say it, the people I'm with who are coming out on a Monday lunchtime to knock on doors when they could be doing a million other things, they see this as very important. And I respect that, because, again, people want to feel listened to and empowered. But I don't have any great views on what the tweaking should be. But rest assured, in terms of the machine of the Conservative Party, we've made some significant progress. But it takes time, and we'll start to see the benefits over the coming months. We still need to invest in technology. And the last thing I would say, which is really important, the hardest thing for me is in the sea change of how we communicate information. And it's social media. And some of the pushback I get from people is they say, Kemi's not getting cut through, or this policy is not getting cut through, or whatever it is. Cut through in inverted commas basically means, is it in your face on your Instagram feed or TikTok feed or whatever? And so I put this back to the people I'm talking to, and I say, when did you last post a pro-conservative message? You don't have to post stuff necessarily from CCHQ, but when did you post? And we all need to be, every day, managing our own cohorts of people around our information and our values. That's how we will win. We need millions of people translating our message into the language that their cohort is receptive to and driving our agenda. And that's why I ask for you. We're making the reforms here. but this is not a passive one-way street. We now need the membership to step forward and be our agents.
Can we spend just a few minutes on candidate selection? And again, this was another thing that we polled members about, asking them about the role of associations in candidate selection and what that process should be. So we asked the question, how much do you agree with this statement? Constituency associations should have the right to determine who their Conservative parliamentary candidate is with minimum interference by CCHQ. We didn't define what that minimum was, but we asked people what their views of that would be. 63% strongly agreed, 28% agreed, 1% strongly disagreed, and only 3% disagreed. And I guess what I want to get to, without getting too much down a rabbit hole, is to what extent is the role of CCHQ to find a brilliant candidate for Little Puddleshire West and to get that person in position and help them and support them? Or to what extent is the role of CCHQ limited to a sort of vetting process, making sure that the people on the list are not mad, bad, or dangerous to know? A criminal records bureau check to make sure you haven't taken endless companies into bankruptcy, to make sure that you haven't had unbelievably peculiar views on various things on social media, but a fairly light touch. And then you sort of take the chance, in a primary, you put your name forward, and presumably if your public speaking isn't up to it, or you can't show a good track record of campaigning, or you're sloppy on policy, well, it'd be pretty hard to get selected in a seat by an association that might be in a seat that we could possibly win. So to what extent do you think, and there were some horror stories, I think, really, at the last election. I've got nothing against Richard Holden. Don't think I've ever met him, but it seemed to me a rum state of affairs that Billericay, which we had known was vacant for ages, was presented with a short list of one with weeks to go. We could have selected a candidate 18 months earlier than that. I think the same thing applied in some other seats too. Oftentimes, associations were only given a list of 3 candidates to select from. Well, why not give them, 23 if that's what the particular association wants? So, I mean, shouldn't this be devolved a bit? And there's clearly a role for CCHQ in, making sure that, people with a criminal history, for sake of argument, or thoroughly untoward views don't make it. But it seems to have been pretty heavy-handed. I mean, Richard Watkins is the most updated question at the moment. Is there something wrong with a Conservative Party that doesn't find room for David Frost and Dan Hannan to stand at a general election? They asked. I don't know what they're obviously both in the House of Lords, but I understand Frost was not in a position to actually put his name forward. This seems a pretty tightly controlled, centralised process, and I thought we Conservatives were rather against central planning.
Yes, well, I mean, you did cite 2 people who are in the House of Lords who actually aren't allowed to vote in a general election, so probably they're not the best candidates. But I know where you're coming from. I mean, let's just look at a few points here. I was a candidate myself for a number of years, and actually, I found being a candidate, this is back in 2005, was a really unattractive choice of occupation. Particularly if you want people who have lives and jobs and careers and so on, families and all the rest of it, which is what we do want. That you're suddenly called up on a Friday evening saying come immediately to Clapton and campaign, and if you don't, you're sort of struck off the list or whatever. And there wasn't an understanding of sort of necessarily what the qualifications were that required to be a good candidate. Clearly, you have to have a balance of lots of different things, but you also want real people who are true Conservatives. And I saw the note that Kemi put out, and I think she's got 4 criteria: communication, charisma, cleverness, and conservatism. I'm not sure whether I would be eligible on all of those 4 categories, but the reality is the centre plays a very important role in selecting, training, nurturing, and developing the candidate cohort or cadre. And I think that is still a crucial role for the central party. And then when it comes to selecting the candidate, we need to be able to give constituencies. And by the way, this isn't just for MP candidates, it's also for many now mayoral candidates, broad county candidates, and so on. So it's not simply I'm looking at the emoji of the shot-looking sort of ghost face. I'm not quite sure what that means. Is that a good emoji or is that a bad emoji? I
It's
don't know
expressing
whether
surprise, but it might be
it's.
that it's not obvious whether that's elation or not. But yeah.
I think that it is important that this. Well, my view is whether the emoji is a happy one or not. It's the right thing to do to have a central list of good candidates, as you say, who are vetted importantly, but also who are then nurtured, trained, and developed. Because I was a candidate when I was pretty young. The assumption was you fight a losing seat, then you get a better seat 5 years later, and you progress. So we're not all made. We're not perfect candidates aren't born. So one for vetting and for providing of a really good list of the best possible candidates. Two for training, nurturing, and developing them rather than simply seeing candidates either as a source of money or as a source of cheap campaigning. And then three, the third point is to help constituencies pick great candidates. Now, I share the same view that many people, I think, on this call do about the mechanisms that CCHQ has used in the past to parachute in favoured candidates. And I don't think that's the right way to go about it, because what you do is you then disintermediate the relationship between the candidate and the constituency, and you need that to be strong. The second thing I saw also was that some of these constituencies we lost because there wasn't a good relationship between the Member of Parliament and the constituency, and they didn't have a proper campaigning mechanism, and as a result of which actually the constituency was neglected and we underperformed. So it's really important that we have good candidates that can be put forward to constituencies, and the constituencies feel they have a high degree of control over how the candidates are selected. And I don't think that's very complicated, and it's not a question of a free-for-all. I think it's the right way of doing it. Everyone has to have an element of control, but ultimately the members have to have a high degree of ownership over how the candidate is selected. I've got to just let my dog in because she wants to join.
Okay,
And
good.
we are an inclusive party.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Sign them up.
She would be an excellent candidate.
Lindsay Sharrett asks, which I guess is sort of on this point, if candidates
the dog gets hearts. I mean, this is the modern world.
there you go.
No one cares
More
about
pet
my
stories. This is going to change this is going to change the Tory party's entire communication strategy based on the emoji reaction on this call.
She's called Margot. She's a fox Labrador. If I can get a picture of her later, we can try and do that.
Lindsay Sharrett asks, if candidates from the right of the party put themselves forward to selection, are you confident that openly sharing of small c Conservative views will not harm their selection prospects in the future? That's to say, if a candidate, I don't know, 2 or 3 years ago has said, I want to run, I'm going to be completely honest with you, I'm skeptical about carbon net zero. I think Britain should leave the ECHR. Would that have been problematic, or would that have been considered to be, well, those are perfectly reasonable views? In fact,
they're the mainstream
the official Conservative Party position before long.
I think
or does that get you marked down?
They practically are, certainly on net zero. There's something called defence archaeology, which I think was coined when everyone digs back 20 years as everything you said. No, I mean we are people, and we believe in the true Conservative values. The reason why I backed Kemi. This is important. I try and explain this to people. I worked for her for 2 years when I was a government minister in the Department for Business and Trade. And I just saw someone who was incredibly courageous about saying those sorts of things when no one else would. And I saw that firsthand in government, I'm afraid. You become very institutionalized and bureaucratic. And she was saying those things. And that's why I just thought, God, this person's a proper Conservative. And she's not afraid to say so. And I was a bit afraid to say so, frankly. You get into these meetings, you don't want to be the only person saying it. You're a junior minister or whatever. She did this stuff. And that's why when we lost the election, I said, you've got to go for it. And backed her and helped raise the money for her, and was amazed and delighted and honoured when she said, come and be the party chairman. Because I saw the things that she was doing and saying, and they are the sorts of things that we must be proud of, and not hold people sort of supposedly to some form of implied offence to. So no, we're a centre-right party, and those values are right and good values, and we became embarrassed by them in many instances, and we have to reverse that now, and I think she can do that.
There's a couple of more. I'm going to finish on a couple of just slightly more technical ones about the operations of the Conservative Party. One goes to the party sort of constitution, which I'm not an expert in either. I've read everything that John Strafford's written about this, but the Conservative Party constitution is a bit like the British constitution. It's broadly written, but in lots of different places, right? So, the 1922 committee rules, for example, are a separate document to the wider Conservative Party rules. So we asked the membership, how much do you agree with this? The constitution of the Conservative Party should never be changed by the party board or its subcommittees without the members of the party having a say in any changes made. Again, it was overwhelming. I'm sorry that most of the results here are kind of North Korean percentages in terms of what people thought, but 81% strongly agree or agree. And then there was a specific thing about the sort of directly elected roles in the Conservative Party. I hope we can pull up that slide. Do you think that the roles of the chairman of the party board, the chairman of the candidates committee, and the chairman of the policy forum should be directly elected by party members? 70% agreed. Not as overwhelming there. I mean, it's an interesting mix at the moment, isn't it? The members of the party get the final say on the party leader once the members of parliament have whittled it down to two. Is that the right way to do it? I mean, one person's argued, should it be whittled down to four? Well, I actually found it pretty engaging to listen to all four candidates, the last four at party conference, but of course you could only then decide between two of them. What about the roles within the party? How much appointments do you want, and how much do you actually want to say, right, well, here are three candidates to be the chairman of the candidates committee. There's your ballot paper. Vote for whether you want Jill or Tim or Brian. It really empower the membership and the activists. So we got that balance right, do you think?
Well, that's a really good question. I mean, I think again, it's important to reverse engineer. What are we trying to achieve by this? I mean, at the end of the day, my job is very simple. It's to do what, Mark?
Well,
What is
to
my job?
win.
To win the election.
Yeah.
Okay. Everything else I say and do, every single thing I could talk
Yeah.
about is irrelevant because we're not
Mhm.
a pressure group or an interest group, which is always the danger of any political party. And the Conservative Party has suffered from that in the past, where you focus only on your own interest rather than on trying to win an election and gain and retain power in order to put our beliefs into action in government. No, my job is to win the next election. So I look at CCHQ, which is effectively what I'm chairman of, and Nigel, I think, is actually the chairman of the board, and focus on making sure that's a machine that will get our candidates' messages out and win as many seats as possible at the next election. That's my primary function. So
Yeah.
if I'm looking at this, the party constitution never being changed without a members say will allow me to do that, then that's the situation that we're in. If it's not, then we've got to be pragmatic and realistic about it. And we also have to invert it too, in a sense, by saying that membership is a privilege and a responsibility. And I think, unfortunately, that has become disjointed for lots of different reasons. I think members have felt unempowered, not connected, or only asked for money, no say in policy, no say in candidate selection, etc., etc. But actually, it also behoves us to turn up and make things happen. So, and I make no apology when I say this. People say to me, we get lots of emails from CCHQ asking for money. And I sort of cringe a bit because I find it's annoying for people to get those emails. But go and raise some money, and then we'll be able to send out less of them. How much money comes in from the constituencies to help me build this war machine? So it's a two-way street, and I think we can get lost talking about constitutional issues, which I'm not particularly qualified to talk on. We should be focusing on how can we bring more people to the party, how can we support each other, feel a greater sense of sort of empowerment amongst each other, and build our movement and propagate our message. I mean, it's pretty
But
straightforward.
that's the key empowerment point, isn't it, that you mentioned earlier, Dominic, that sort of, some people might feel by joining, they're sort of giving a modest donation of 39 quid a year or whatever it is. But presumably, if we want to start building up again from our relatively low base of 130,000 members or whatever it is, then the fact that you can have a say in, who's running the party, who's my local candidate going to be, who's the leader of the party going to be, we give the membership the say of the biggest decision of all,
That's very
in
important. That's key.
attraction, right?
Yeah, and I love that. And that's what we want to do more of. And that's what I was saying. More involvement in policy, more involvement in candidate selection. We have a board which is highly democratic and is very represented. But it's right, I think, that the leader picks the chair of the board. But almost all the other participants are the 22 chairman of the 22, the chairman of the ACP, all the different national chairmen, Julian Ellicott. I welcome people to come. I'm not sure if it's a private meeting, but certainly come at the beginning and you can see all the people sitting around the table. This is a representative board. And I can assure you, as someone who sits in those meetings, the party is at the core of every discussion. And this is not a disembodied rubber stamp in any respect. So I think it actually works really well. In terms of the constitution being changed, I don't really. I'm afraid I can't make a particular comment on that. What I think is important is that we're always pragmatic and flexible-minded about what we're trying to achieve, which is to
Yep.
win the next election. And thank you, by the way, for everyone here. But let me ask you this question again. I've asked how many of you of the 100 or so on the call have posted today a pro-conservative political message to try and influence your cohort? How many of you today have have helped raise money for the party? How many of you today have got a new member? Or when did each of you last here get a new member for the Conservative Party or make a personal contribution in terms of building the movement? That's some of you will have done. Thank you very much. But many of us don't. And it's important we realize this is a big mission. This is an army we're building to win. And we're at the bottom of the cycle and we've got a long journey ahead of us. And we will only be successful if we focus on the core goals, which is growing our movement, getting our resources right and getting our message out.
Let's finish by taking a range of the questions that have been upvoted and saying perhaps a bit more about CCHQ in terms of its campaigning forte, rather than just what the rules of the game are and who sits on what committee and how they're elected. This is a pretty tricky and controversial one, and I'll declare a bit of an interest here. David Campbell Bannerman of the Conservative Democratic Organisation, that they've done a huge amount around changing the way the Constitution works. He says, "Hi, Lord Johnson, can you please reassure us that Dougie Smith is no longer employed by Central Office or the Conservative Party? What was his role, and what is your view of the allegations set out in the plot by Nadine Dorries? Who is in control of our party?" The thing that I will consider is I've known Dougie Smith for more than 20 years, and I think he's a bit of a political genius. But I suppose that this story, I don't know how accurate Nadine's book is, I have read it, again, sort of feeds into the fact that there's a sort of backroom staff of people who are sort of running the party. It's not quite clear where they sit in the management organogram, who's reporting to who, what's the role of this person here. It's all a bit sort of doesn't appear to be very transparent. Do you have any thoughts on that? And under your watch, will the Conservative Party sort of organogram, whoever's working in the press office or the research department, would it be crystal clear who's sort of doing what, who reports to who, who's the departmental head, who the juniors are that report up to him or her, etc.? What are your thoughts on that topic, Dominic?
I mean, I totally agree with you. And as I say, we've now come to a conclusion of the restructuring, which was really hard. Actually, there are a lot of people who are involved. It's complex and sensitive for the individuals. So I'm not going to talk about any individuals. I'm afraid at this stage. I mean, all these things will become clear. But I will say that there are now very clear structures. We've simplified what was a pretty Byzantine series of reporting structures, with everyone basically being a chief and no one necessarily doing the work underneath that point, to bring people together under clear directorships. And the issue I've got, and I keep returning to this, and I want to mention another point about David's work in terms of constituencies, but the world has changed. And the idea that you have a nice research piece over here, and then you have a press piece over here, you talk to the Daily Mail, then you have someone else here who does a leaflet. That's all changed now. We are all in our individual social media army, and everything has to be looked at through the prism of how the information can be conveyed according to the new mechanism for delivering information and receiving it. And that means that the person who in CRD used to write a very, very wonderful detailed report on road transport pricing for delivery for sort of parliamentary debate now needs to be thinking differently in terms of what are they trying to achieve, in terms of getting the message out, in terms of how our philosophies, positions, and policies are developed. That's intensely complicated to make those changes. It's cultural and it involves a lot of technological changes. So we've tried to bring everyone together so that they're all responsible for that effectively, in terms of how they feed into campaigning, how we invest in campaigning on the ground, how we help training. This is really important. This is now no longer a centrally directed principle where we give you a leaflet template to deliver to a door. We have to give you training to enable you to create your local content to influence a Facebook group that then shows that you are actually embedded in the principle around preparing the potholes, or whatever it may be. So this is
vital, right? Because in today's politics, basically everyone and anyone is an amateur journalist, right?
Yes, they are.
Back in the day where there's probably, I don't know, 50 journalists that you want to influence to cover your story.
Yeah.
I mean, there still are, right? I mean, it's worth us getting positive coverage in newspapers and on television. But my God, it's changed. I mean, I would have thought, getting Kemi on the Joe Rogan podcast is considerably more important than getting her on the Today program.
Well, I don't know. I mean, what you say clearly, anecdotally is absolutely right. Um, People say now, not what I read. If you go, if you took, even us 10 years ago, our parents' generation, did you read that thing that happened to Kemi? Did you read that thing about whatever? Now it's, did you see that thing?
Yeah.
So it's completely different. And actually, how journalists function, they're now developing their own brands as well. So actually, the future is, politicians, individuals will be even more relevant in terms of their own brand development, their own followership, and in the same way that a minister could have been picked 20 years ago because they've got fabulous press coverage. I think in the future they're also going to have they got social media coverage, and the candidates, how we pick candidates, is going to have to be really around how can they manage their social media profile effectively, and if they can't, it'll be as bad as if they can't give a speech, or break up halfway through giving a talk or something. But there's
Yeah.
one thing I just wanted to touch on because it's really interesting, which is constituencies. And I don't want to let hair start running here because this is neither my area of competence, nor is it something I have a great deal of expertise in terms of sort of knowledge of the systems. But we need a national movement, and more of our campaigns are actually non-constituency. So they're mayoral, which are really important for us. They're regional, or they're county, or they're London mayor, or Wales, or whatever it may be. And so sort of finding ways, and I don't know what the answers are. So please don't sort of come back to me saying I'm trying to come up with a plan, because I'm not. But I'm just genuinely saying we've got to find ways to broaden our activities around beyond the constituency structure. So ways for constituencies to collaborate better, ways for counties to collaborate better, naturally thinking more about the sort of the bigger picture, the mayoral election, whatever it may be. I don't necessarily know how to do that on an organizational front, but I would ask very much, David has been doing great work in lots of different areas. Think about that. How do we project ourselves as a modern political movement with a membership that is empowered and engaged, but not necessarily solely focusing around the constituency as the prime sort of unit of activity?
Well, but maybe I could float an idea to you, and I suggested this sort of broad approach to a couple of your predecessors as chairman of the party, and I will also confess I'm not entirely sure how to execute it. But it also seems to me that in the modern age, the idea that you are in a binary way either a member of a thing or not is a bit passé, really. I mean, I'm not suggesting that the political party should scrap membership, but it's a very 1950s, 1960s sort of view of the world that you're a member of the Conservative Party and the Rotary Club and the local chess club, and you have a small piece of paper in your wallet with a number imprinted on it, which proves this point to anybody that you would want to show it to. It seems to me our starting point from an admittedly low base is we should be reaching out to all, what was it, 6 million people who voted Conservative at the last election. We should be attempting to identify them. Now, obviously, there's not a perfect way of doing that. There is a perfect way of working out whether I've written a check for 39 quid to the party, but we've got vote source, and people put down as C's, and then we know whether they voted on the marked register. I don't know what the sort of criteria would be, but the age of mass membership political parties is over, basically. I think at its peak, the Conservatives had 3.5 million members. I mean, it's unbelievable. So 1 in 10 of the adult population was a member of the Conservative Party. You're on 15% of the vote before you've even started. Now it seems to me that you're much more likely to be in some Facebook group, or you've told a canvasser that you're voting Conservative. You don't want to be a member of the party, but you might be willing to throw a few quid in a bucket, or you might be willing to put a poster up in your window. I think you should be treated as a member of the Conservative family. And our starting point should be those 6 million, however many votes we got at the last election, of whom the 130,000 are an absolutely crucial subset and should obviously get more rights, privileges, and be prevailed upon more than we would prevail upon somebody who just casually says on the doorstep that they're a Conservative voter. But that's the movement we need to actually get to, isn't it? Rather than being particularly obsessed about how many membership cards are in how many wallets. That's a very old-fashioned way of measuring our level of support or building a movement.
Well, well, yes and no. I mean, I think members are important, because they're more motivated in order to take action, and they're organizers and they're propagators. So I think membership is important. And I think people do want to be members. Other political parties are attracting members. So we've got to be aware of the fact that we need to attract members too. So I think people want to belong as much today as they always have done. And it's human nature. But interestingly, the Primrose League, so when I went to the Bodleian Library, as I said earlier, to look at the archives, I asked to see stuff on the Primrose League, because for me, that's a really interesting beginning of mass movement political membership. And they said, no, we don't have any information on the Primrose League because that wasn't part of the Conservative Party, which right. I didn't realize. That came as a really interesting sort of bolt from the blue. So we need movements around our mission. And many people won't want to be a member of the Conservative Party, but will want to support us and believe in our philosophy. Some may want to be even more reticent, or whatever it may be. Some want to get really involved on specific aspects, but again, don't want to be part of an organization. But at the end of the day, we have to design a party membership offering that is attractive. Yeah. And I think that too often we've said what you just said, which is, oh, it's from the 1950s, and so we shouldn't bother. No, we should bother. We're looking at the wrong way around. We're saying because we don't have as many members as we want, it's not worth doing. No, everyone in the country would join something if it was made attractive to them, and everyone in the UK, most people, are a member of something. So let's make them be a member of the Conservative Party. Or
no, I guess my wider point was whether
you can have affiliate memberships, and you can have
but more to the
Conservative
point,
friends of doctors or whatever. Yeah, you do, that's the whole point. It's a whole movement around it. We must cherish the member because they are the most engaged, active people. And we depend upon them for financial support, for activity and decision making.
No, I completely agree with that. And they're going to be the base and the backbone of the party up and down the land. It was more to the point that you were making earlier, Dominic, about the new technologies, allow us to communicate at to far more people at a much lower cost. If 30 years ago, you were seeking to get Conservative voters who weren't members to come along to a meeting, or to, well, there wasn't Zoom, obviously, but, now to join a call, it would have been very difficult to do. You would have had to put letters through doors, direct mail. Now, in theory, we should be able to identify how to get to the 6 million who voted for us at our lowest possible ebb, and then invite them to the policy discussion evening, the pizza and politics evening, the drink with a shadow cabinet minister.
And that's what we're going to do. I'm very excited about that. As I said at the beginning, we could have a direct conversation with 35 million members of the electorate. And that's the situation I wanted to be in as soon as possible, where we're taking this input. Everyone cares. Most people care about their country. And we can have that conversation with them, learn from them, adapt our messaging so that it can be heard in the right way, and we can motivate people and sell our message. It's very frustrating for me that the biggest problem I find most frustrating personally is the lack of engagement with the young voter. Terrible statistics in terms of the under 40s, 50s, compared to Margaret Thatcher, who won a greater vote share of the under 30s than she did above. We are the philosophy of young people who want to make a life for themselves. There's nothing else out there for them. Labour are only going to derogate their life. And we've got to find a way to connect with them and find an offering that appeals to them. As you rightly say, it could be membership at £39 a year or whatever, but it could be another way. And that's absolutely our determined mission. We cannot win without doing that.
Let me finish, I guess, by asking you two questions about, just looking ahead somewhat. What do you think the biggest overall challenges for the Conservative Party over the next 12 months? And I don't mean a specific election or even the May local elections. And, if we invited you back and you accepted in a year's time, what would be the markers about, whether things were, radically improving, getting worse, staying about the same? So what's the big thing that you think the bit we've got to crack that we haven't cracked yet is this, but in the next 12 months, we're going to crack it? And what are the sort of metrics of that? How would the folk on this call know in a year's time, well, we've moved a little in the right direction, a lot in the right direction, overwhelmingly in the right direction, slipped back a little bit? How do we make that judgment?
Yeah, very good points. I mean, I think that the challenges for me is, and Nigel and Rachel and so on, is to affect the transformation of CCHQ so that we can deliver our message effectively and build our movement. So again, reverse engineer that. In a year's time, are we winning elections? Are we likely to do well or better in relative terms for the local elections next year? Have we increased our cut through in terms of social media? Is there a sense of a growing movement and growing membership? I mean, it is very, very simple in my view, and it's measurable by everyone, and you feel it too. And I'm excited about the policy development program. I'm excited about what we've got lined up for the party conference, which I'd recommend everyone gets involved with. And I'm excited by the newness of what we're trying to do. And that's going to raise some puzzled eyebrows. It's going to be hopefully quite radical in its sort of sense of what we're thinking and talking about, even if we don't want to be sort of going off with lots of different radical policies. We want to make sure that everything's sensible and costed. But in terms of talking about the future, we have to be seen as being really bold and innovative. And that's great. It's going to be amazing. And the change in the world, the changes in how parties campaign and communicate. I think this is completely fascinating. And it's such an opportunity. It's getting better and easier to communicate with people in this country, to hear them, to engage with members, to do things like this. And that's very energizing.
And I guess I'm going to just throw in one very final question to land on. Obviously, the Conservatives, more than any of the other political parties in the UK, have had the most colossal rebuilding mission, which you're, a very key part of after the July general election. You're in office for a very long period of time, focused largely on government, and then you get, a pretty grim election result. We've got to sort of rebuild, and that takes time. I don't think there's anyone who could have led the Conservative Party to an immediate turnaround within 9 months of the previous general election. It takes a long time. Often, worth looking back to Margaret Thatcher's early months as leader of the opposition as well. It took a lot of time to put things back in place. So I guess there's a need to be patient. But do you think at the moment we're being bold enough on actually staking out some policy positions? And I don't mean a kind of fully costed tax policy that we've worked out we can reduce income tax by tuppence and raise the higher threshold to this. And here's a matrix that proves it all adds up. And we're going to spend a bit more on this and a bit less on that. And the IFS have, sorted out all the numbers. There it is, signed off. I mean, big picture positions. It seems to me that the jury is in on whether or not you support carbon net zero. There's not much more research to be done. Seems to me the jury's in on whether we should stay in the ECHR and retain the Human Rights Act. I mean, sincere people can disagree, but nevertheless, it's not obvious to me what more research is required before we can stake out a position. Now, those are not policies. Leaving the ECHR and repealing the Human Rights Act does not solve the immigration issue, but they're positions that can be staked out such that the wider electorate now has a broad view about where you're coming from in order to tackle the almost innumerable challenges that the United Kingdom has. You might take a view on, the rough scale of tax cuts that you'd like to bring in, and you want it to fall to X% of GDP. These would be sort of broad positions. And then, sure, you wait till 2028 or the eve of the election before you've actually got the fully costed manifesto with everything treble checked and in triplicate. But do you think more could be done now to actually say on the big issues of the day, carbon net zero, the ECHR, the Refugee Convention, possibly part of our immigration issue, diversity, equality and inclusion, two-tier justice? We're going to sketch out some big picture positions, not quite 30,000 feet, not philosophy, not what would Edmund Burke think of it, but what would the electorate understand our stance was on some of the big controversies of the day?
So, firstly, I think we've done a lot. We've done quite a bit of that already. And I think Kemi's been very clear about net zero. She gave a great speech about a month ago where she made it clear that these policies have resulted in energy that was less reliable and more expensive. I mean, our energy policy is core to our future. So, have the flags been run at the flagpole there? Very clearly. For me, it's about positions, and that's a position which has been taken. The specific policy in terms of how you solve our energy crisis, frankly, is hugely complex, and you wouldn't want to rush that now. But I think she's been very clear on that. She's also been very clear on immigration as well. Maybe I'm to blame for not getting the cut through so that everyone in the audience is hearing what she said, but very significant corrections from our previous immigration policies. And she says things in a way, frankly, that I love her clarity about the cultural homogeneity of the UK being at the core of our success and multiculturalism being an absolute derogation of that. The whole principle.
And this is a home, not a hotel line is a very powerful.
This is it's everything that's important. And that's actually a total reversal of everything that we've heard and said for the last 25 years. So she's a very brave individual in the sense she's saying those things. So there's a lot out there, actually. But there's also, you talk about other points, the woke agenda and so on. This is very important to us, and it signals it very powerfully. But actually, we've also got to be making sure that we're covering the core concepts, which we haven't touched on today, like the health service. How do we keep ourselves well? Without vast expense crushing our economy? How do we actually manage immigration in a practical sense to make sure people are properly integrated and we're controlling our borders? Transportation, which again doesn't get many headlines, but is at the core. I mean, I commuted today. I came up from Wiltshire. It stood all the way. Incredibly expensive. This is. There's a sense that, and it comes out unfortunately from much of our time in power, that the state doesn't deliver, and only hurdles are put in the way of people who want to live their lives. Yeah. And we have to be very smart about understanding why that was the case, because there were many great people who were in government over the last 15 years. So why was it that the bureaucracy was so undefeatable? And what is going to be the mechanism for changing that into the future? And how do we get the state to deliver truly for people? How are we radical about that to enable that to be the case, so that you can have great healthcare and the cost of living is managed and people can live great lives? Yep. This is the Conservative agenda that I'm part of, and I want all of you and to say thank you to you for engaging today. But come and get involved. Bring us your ideas, bring us your energy, bring us your participation, bring us some of your sweat, blood, and cash.
Dominic, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you. My idea on PopCons is that when we return to power, our first priority has got to be a great repeal act to get a lot of change to the way that government operates, a full reset. Otherwise, we'll find ourselves trying to navigate a bureaucratic system that conservatism can't really navigate, in my view. So then I think there's going to be a big reset and restoration at the start. Dominic, I really appreciate you giving us so much time. I know you've got a hugely busy schedule and you're out every night rattling the tin. And
yes, I'm getting fat. My waistline. My waistline extends.
These are the sacrifices we all need to make to return the Conservatives to office, Dominic. I'm incredibly grateful to you. Thanks for all who have joined the call. If you look in the chat box, if you're not yet a member of the PopCon Opinion Panel, there's a link there to allow you to join the panel. There's also a link to my piece in last week's PopCon newsletter about my views on how we need to build a new army for the Conservatives. Also, an advertisement coming up next on our next Pop Conversation is Suella Braverman, former Home Secretary. That's, if I recall correctly, on June the 6th. There's a link in the chat. Please join us for that chat with Suella. I'm guessing most of you are recipients of our email newsletter bulletin. Otherwise, it would have been hard to navigate your way here. But if you're not, you can please go to the Popular Conservatism website, give us your email address, and we'll keep you abreast of all the activities we're doing to try and build a conservative movement across the UK. Thanks all. Dominic, my particular thanks to you. Fascinating. Really appreciate you engaging with us. Such an important task you've got. And we wish you all the very best. I look forward to catching up with you very, very soon. Good luck to you.
Thanks very much.
Over and out. Good night, everyone.